much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving to the next session, which is dedicated to international normative frameworks for artists. What is the guidance for artists and cultural professionals as per the African Union Agenda of 2063 and the Charter of African Cultural Renaissance? Key aspects of the 1980 recommendation concerning the status of the artist and the 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions will be evoked. We have the pleasure to have with us today Ms. Angela Martins, the head of culture from the African Union Commission. Ms. Martins, with further delay, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Guillaumard, and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to share my screen. I have a short presentation. Mr. Firmin Matoko, ADG Priority Africa and External Relations at UNESCO, His Excellency Mr. Awinash Teluk, Minister of Arts and Cultural Heritage of Mauritius, dear colleagues, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the African Union Commission, I would like to express gratitude and congratulate UNESCO for this initiative to promote the African artists and cultural and creative industries. Like I said, I have a short presentation. And basically in my presentation and following on the theme of the session, I will present some features of the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance of 2006 with regards to the status or provisions that speak about the promotion of the artists. I'll also speak about the AU Agenda 2063 of 2015 and the Plan of Action, the AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries, which was originally adopted in 2008, but it was revised in 2019. And like I mentioned, I'll mention provisions in these three AU instruments with regards to the promotion of the artists. And finally, I'll speak about the way forward to strengthen the status of artists and cultural workers on the continent. As you might be aware, the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance was adopted in 2006 by the 6th AU Assembly. We have currently 14 African Union member states that have ratified this instrument, and 35 member states have signed it. Since 2006 to date, the AUC has been undertaking campaigns on the promotion of this instrument. The 14 ratifications we achieved were due to the sensitization and advocacy of the instrument to the AU member states. So this instrument will enter into force upon the receipt by the African Union Commission of the 15th instrument of ratification by member states. We are missing one member state for the instrument to enter into force. So what is the main focus of the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance? Promotion of African identity, shared values, the spirit of Pan-Africanism, development of the creative economy, protection and conservation of African World Heritage Sites, development of a continued dissemination of regional and continental programs for the promotion of African identity, shared values and heritage, and also providing the rightful place for the arts, culture and heritage sector at national level so that the sector provides meaningful contribution to development. Now, the second key instrument is the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, which is a strategic framework for inclusive growth and sustainable development on the continent. The AU Agenda 2063, as you are aware, is rooted in the spirit of Pan-Africanism and the AU vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in the global arena. As it was mentioned by Mr. Matoko, the agenda has a specific aspiration for culture, which is aspiration 5, and which reads an Africa with a strong cultural identity, values, and ethics. This is already also reflected in the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance. The third AU instrument I wish to refer to is the AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries. Like I mentioned, it was adopted by the AU Assembly in 2008, has a revision of several instruments before, and it was also revised as per the directive of the Ministers of Culture in 2019. So the Plan of Action is a guide towards the development and strengthening of the African cultural and creative industries in order to facilitate delivery of wider communication, of wider social and economic impact. Recognizing the role that this sector, the cultural and creative industries, can play in job creation, poverty alleviation, trade, and regional integration, the plan articulates priorities and paths for the development of the African cultural and creative industries, as well as provides a framework that allows for effective coordination of inputs from member states, strategic planners, partners, and stakeholders towards a common goal. The Plan of Action, the AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries, has identified key areas which are affecting the development of the cultural and creative industries in Africa. The first one is markets for Africa cultural and creative industries. The second area is education, capacity building, and sustainability. The third is finance and investment. The fourth is intellectual property rights. The fifth is ICTs. The next one, cultural infrastructure. The next one, cultural and creative industry statistics. And the last one, social inclusion and cohesion. Now I'll move on to the provisions in these 3 instruments that refer to the artists and cultural workers. Like I mentioned before, all three instruments clearly have provisions that refer to issues related to the status of artists and cultural workers as producers and promoters of CCIs. For instance, in the AU Agenda 2063, we speak of the protection of heritage, illicitly trafficked from the continent. We also speak about culture, heritage has a common identity and meaning, which will be centered to all our strategies so as to facilitate a Pan-African approach and the African Renaissance. With regards to the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, we have, for instance, an objective which reads to promote freedom of expression and cultural democracy, which is inseparable from social and political democracy. Another provision reads, respect for freedom to create and the liberation of the creative genius of the peoples. This provision is under principles. Then we have protect and promote the freedom of artists, intellectuals, and men and women of culture. Again, under principles. And there's a statement which calls upon member states to commit themselves to recognize cultural expressions by the youth, according them their true value and responding to their aspirations in accordance with African culture and values. Okay. Now I move on to provisions under the Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries. Mainly, I've picked those related to intellectual property rights. Key point number 6 reads, intellectual property rights protection is essential in fostering human creativity and innovation, giving content creators incentives in the form of recognition and fair economic rewards increases their ability, their activity, and the quality of their output and products. Key point number 7 reads, Africa has the fastest growing and most youthful population in the world. The youth, again referring to the youth involvement in the sector, are the largest consumers and creators of digital cultural content with different attitudes and modes of use. Hence, the need for the protection of intellectual property rights has a springboard for creativity and innovation, research and development, youth employment, and economic transformation. The next slide refers to how, of course, do we translate these provisions and make them more useful for the artists in terms of promoting their status. There was a conference of ministers of culture in October 2018 in Algeria, and we called the Conference of Ministers of Arts and Culture Specialized Technical Committee, and the ministers took a decision to support the proposal by Algeria for the creation of an African Confederation of Copyright, which will assist in the development review of national copyright laws to recover and preserve the rights of artists. Also, the same decision calls for the development of a model law on copyright and the establishment of a working group for the development of this copyright model law. Also, as you might be aware, the African Union established the Pan-African Intellectual Property Organization, which is yet to be operationalized in Tunisia. Tunisia has offered to host this organization. So the AUC is in the process of operationalizing this institution, which will go a long way in also protecting the rights and status of the artists. So what is the AUC doing in this regard? We will be, in the coming months, engaging with the various partners, UNESCO included, in order to implement this decision and also work with the instruments that exist in the international level so that we promote further the work of the artists on the continent. This is all I had to share. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Due delay, I would like to give the floor to Professor Kimani Njogu.
Group in Kenya. You have the floor. Thank you. For 5 minutes, please try to keep your messages to sort of key ideas. Thank you very much. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep to the 5 minutes. In my view, decent work in culture is best achieved through an environment of freedom and equity. And of course, that means that for you to be able to ensure that such an environment exists, you must have a policy and legislative framework that governs the relationship between the practitioners in arts and culture or the creative sector generally, and governments, as well as the corporate world, and between the artists themselves. So a policy environment that facilitates the exercise of freedom and equity. It also becomes necessary to be able to look at the type of environment that would ensure, certain basic needs are met, such as healthcare, pension schemes, and so on. We know that the creative sector generally operates in informal as well as in informal sector, self-employment, single entrepreneurship, and so forth, so that it operates in a non-standard form. And I do not subscribe to the view that we need to formalize the creative sector as such. I think that you can still facilitate basic needs by just looking at the ways in which the sector organizes itself, so that you build into the operations of the sector those safety nets that are required for social protection. So that, for example, if it is healthcare, you build a national, insurance system for health that would also take care of people who work in the informal sector. The decent work also requires sufficient financial support. And I think that there is really need across the continent to ensure that governments work with financing institutions, financial institutions and banks and so on, to be able to make available resources for the creative sector so that they are able to create even when they are working in a very difficult, situations that do not have collateral and so on. And I think that there could be some arrangement that would allow them to access those resources. So working directly with financing institutions to facilitate access to those to funds to enhance the work of the creative and cultural industries. I also think that across the continent, the budget that is given by government to culture is far too low. And for us to be able to have decent work, we must absolutely access some of the national resources. And I think that governments have a responsibility to up the budgets that they give the ministries of culture, especially when you consider that culture plays an important role in agriculture, in other sectors of our society. Therefore, funding from government is absolutely important. Across the continent, we still have legislation that seeks to limit artistic freedom. I think that it is important that we do not limit creativity. We do not limit the imagination of our artists. Even if you're going to have legislation that protects certain sectors of society, from what they might perceive to be kind of too direct content, you do not want to limit artistic freedom and the creativity of people. And I just want now to also just mention something about the development of institutions. It is important that you develop institutions at the national level as well as at the local level that are public and that have sufficient personnel and resources to be able to protect the sector, and that these institutions do not speak across each other, that they speak to each other, and they are mutually reinforcing. And I think that the role of civil society in those institutions becomes absolutely critical. You should always, almost as a matter of policy, ensure that all institutions that work in the cultural space have a presence of civil society as well as the overall practitioners in the sector. Issues of intellectual property really critical. I think that I can see the moderator is stepping in just to be able to say that in the case of Kenya, we believe very strongly that you must review, legislation and ensure that copyright, piracy, copyright enforcement is in place, that there is no piracy, that creatives actually get what they deserve, and that they actually get fair remuneration for the work that they do, and that you mediate between the creators and the corporate sector, so that the artists are not exploited. finally, to just say that at the Creative Economy Working Group, we work with creators and work with the government to be able to create these facilitative environments. And I think that it is important that the instruments that we create are well taken care of. And that's what we are trying to do under the Creative Economy Working Group in Kenya. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think this is a fantastic webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kimani Njogu. This is fascinating, and you're giving really a hard time me to having to cut all these important inputs that actually show that there are different perspectives, different approaches to these very issue.